Hi everyone. Before starting day one of the study, going through all of the materials, which I'm sure you are eager to do, it is a good idea to get some background about how we constructed the study, why we constructed it the way we did, and how we've laid out the analysis that we've put together. So this is the background, the clients, the situation, and so on. And I think it's a good place to start. I think it's important to understand what we were trying to do when we put together this study. When I was in management consulting and when we currently train clients who are McKinsey consultants and BCG consultants, one of the things that always, I think, bothered us is that if you arrived at McKinsey or BCG or Bain, for that matter, and you wanted to know how to do a strategy study from start to finish, that material didn't actually exist. It still doesn't exist. So those firms have a lot of material, but there's no guide that tells you, hey, this is what you do on day 2 or day 3. This is how you put together a, for example, hypothesis. This is how you generate your analyses plans from your hypotheses. That information existed within those firms, but never in a very simple format that you could follow. So the step-by-step guide for associates, analysts, and managers was missing, and those are the targets that we are setting. We are targeting associates, analysts, and managers. So we are approaching this from the side of a manager managing an associate, an associate managing an analyst, and an analyst managing their piece of work. We have set it up in such a way that we've built a complete study, and then we broke it down into the different steps per day and per week that you would need to follow it to complete the study, and we've numbered each guide. So we started from week 1, week 2, week 3, week 4, all the way to week N, and we said, okay, what is step 1? What is step 2? What is step 3? And we've built that step for you. So you just have to follow the numbered steps. Beyond that, throughout the study, you will see 3 things. You will see these videos, right? So you will see the videos explaining each of the documents. You will then see the actual PowerPoint of the document. So if you want to watch the video, you can. If you want to scroll through the PowerPoints, you can do that. At certain steps, we will show you how to do a certain kind of analysis. So we'll say do this step 1, step 2, step 3, and then later we will present the actual way you need to do it. So there's a guide and there's a solution. So in this way we have toolkits, templates, and the final answers, right? The other thing we wanted to do was to make this fun. Strategy training is eminently boring wherever you do it, whether you're doing it in a business school, whether you're reading about it in a book. What happens in strategy training is they tend to focus on the toolkits or the analytical approach and the insights. But what I'm interested in is what is the different steps that are needed to be followed to finish the analysis, and how do you finish them? So what is step 1? How do you go to step 2? How do you go to step 3? How do you go to step 4? So we've tried to make it very simple, because what you will notice, and what you would have noticed already by watching the CEO videos, is that it's a very sequential process, and it is not difficult to do, and we tend to think that strategy consulting is very difficult, but it's not. There's a business judgment side which is difficult to replicate, but beyond that, the rest of it can be laid out so we can show you how to replicate a complete strategy study. You will not need a background in finance, business, accounting, or management. That's a myth. A lot of people assume, oh, I need to have a strong background, a strong grounding in business. You don't need it. You'll see that through this training. All we want is you need to have an internet connection to watch the videos and access the PowerPoints, coffee, because there's a lot of this stuff, and quite a lot of time as well. And we'd recommend that you maybe set this out as a, if you have time every day, you can set this out as a 1-month project. You can say, okay, in 1 month, I want to learn how to do a strategy study. Or you can say in 2 months, right? Because this is laid out to be a 5-week study. What are we trying to do here? At the end of this, we want you to be able to go to a client and complete a real study after finishing this training. That is our objective. It's not to give you an oversight of management consulting. It's not to give you an overview. It's to teach you how to actually do the analysis so that if you wanted to go to a client after this, watching the study, you should be able to do it and complete the analysis. Now let's talk to the background, right? We've set the study in 2001. It's 2001. A lot of things have gone wrong. You've got the telecoms meltdown, you've got 9/11. This was before BlackBerry. Nortel has collapsed. The Ontario government is really concerned because there is no major domestic players in the operating the technology space. So you must imagine that you've just had the telecoms bubble. Most domestic and federal governments, national and federal and state governments, have seen the potential of the tech sector to create value. Of course, they've lost a lot of value as well. But the Ontario government here is concerned that they don't have a domestic champion. Who is going to represent Ontario, or for that matter, Canada, in the telecom space, right? So that's one issue affecting the way government is thinking. At the same time, the government of Ontario, which is the largest province or state in Canada, is looking at the state-owned enterprises that they own, and is saying, you know what, we own 3 major state-owned enterprises: Ontario Distribution, which is the company that distributes power to households within Ontario; Ontario Power, which is a company that generates power or electricity in Ontario; and Ontario Transit, which is managing all the rail subway lines across Ontario. They're looking at these 3 companies which the government owns and manages, and they're saying, you know what? These companies are a massive burden on our balance sheet. Ontario Distribution has high costs, a weak balance sheet, not enough cash on hand, a lot of liabilities, and is woefully unproductive, which means that if you divide its output value by the input cost, it's very low. Ontario Power went through a period of rapid expansion, has unrelated assets on its balance sheet, and has a disorganized strategy. It is not clear what is the strategy of Ontario Power. Ontario Transit, a cumbersome company, because you can imagine it's managing trains across Ontario, all the rail lines, all the subway lines, all the bus lines across all the cities across Ontario. That is a cumbersome behemoth of a business, right? So one problem is no technology companies. The other one is the current state-owned enterprises are very inefficient. The government has come up with what it thinks is a solution to fix both problems. It's going to take the IT divisions of each of these companies, it's going to ring fence them, and it's going to merge them to create a new company called Newco, which is going to list on the NASDAQ. Okay, my writing isn't exactly beautiful. And on the TSX, the Toronto Stock Exchange, right? And the thinking is that if it can remove some of these cost centers from these companies, it could make them more efficient and allow them to lower their costs and refocus their business. At the same time, this new merged company could be a new technology champion which can serve local Canadian companies and expand into the United States. Now, this is a strategy that has been deployed quite effectively in other parts of the world, but let's not worry about that. What we're looking at here is the fact that the government wants to ring fence these IT divisions. When you think of IT divisions, these are not small departments. Some of these IT divisions have hundreds of people. So do not think of a few guys sitting in a corner playing around with laptops. These are IT divisions for power companies. They do sophisticated work, right? They manage grid lines and so on. Transit companies managing scheduling and so on. Very sophisticated IT departments. Some of them are divisions. They're not just departments. And that's the background to the case. You've got a government that's worried about no technology companies in the domestic environment. It's worried about its state-owned enterprises which are being held down by excessive costs, and it's trying to strip out some of those costs by liberating them of their IT divisions and then creating a new company. And the thinking here is that if the IT division of Ontario Distribution is spun off into a separate company, Ontario Distribution would still hire them to do the work. So this new company, Newco as such, has a fixed client base, at least for the short term. Now, let's continue talking about what's happening here. Now, let's continue talking about what is happening in this case, right? This is a map of Ontario. Just so you know, Ontario is a big, big state, right? Most people would be familiar with this part of Ontario. You've got Toronto here, you've got Ottawa here, you've probably got Kingston here, you've got London here, and you've got Buffalo, USA down here, right? And you've probably got Oakville here, you've got Mississauga here. That's generally what it looks like. So most of the activity and most of the population of Ontario sits here, but there's all kinds of activity taking place up here, and obviously distribution lines need to extend all over the state wherever there's people, and there's obviously bus lines being managed here and so on. So let's just give you a rundown of these companies. Ontario Distribution, it manages all of the electricity distribution in the state. Obviously that's not true. In the real world there are many different distribution companies, but we've created one fictitious company that manages all distribution. Ontario Distribution IT is the tech division of Ontario Distribution. Of all of the tech divisions merging, Ontario Distribution IT is the largest tech division or the largest company in the merger. Ontario Power manages all of Ontario's power generation facilities. So the nuclear station that's somewhere here, the gas station that's somewhere here, the wind farms that are somewhere here, it's managing it. In reality, Ontario probably has several generation companies, but we've created one. Ontario IT is a department within Ontario Power. So it is not a division like the way it is for Ontario Distribution. This one division is resisting the merger because it believes that the IT skills need to sit within Ontario Power to effectively serve their needs. And they do have some valid claims there, because if you've ever been to a power plant, you know that IT needs to integrate very closely with process control to run those facilities. So they are resisting the merger because they think if you spin out IT into a separate company, it won't be that interested in managing the assets as effectively. Ontario Transit, as I mentioned, manages all of the buses, trains, subway systems, and so on. Now, we've based this on real companies by visiting real companies, but the names and the details are all fictitious. We didn't think it's appropriate to mention real companies here. Now, all three companies have different backgrounds and problems. The distribution market is about to be deregulated. What that means is that the market will no longer be served by one company. Prices can be set in the market and competitors can enter the market. And if this happens, it is expected that Ontario Distribution will lose 45% of its market. So it'll basically halve in size, right? Ontario Distribution IT is the largest company in the merger by manpower, but if Ontario Distribution has 45% less business, therefore it is conceivable that it's going to need less IT support. So it's expected that 30% to 40% of the service level agreements that Ontario Distribution IT will have with Ontario Distribution after the split up will be lost, because Ontario Distribution just wouldn't need so much work, right? So for those of you not familiar, distribution, so imagine you have a power plant here, somewhere far away. The power plant then takes the electricity to a transmission line, which transmits it over big distances to a city. And once you get to the city, the power goes from a transmission line, to a distributor, who then, I don't want to get into technical terms, but who then transmits it to different homes and businesses. So you've got a generation side here, GX, you've got a transmission side, TX, and you have a distribution side, DX. Ontario Distribution is dealing with that side of the business. Ontario Power is dealing with this side of the business. It wants to build new gas and wind turbines. So it's involved in a lot of capital expansion while it wants to refurbish its nuclear fleet. Refurbish means that after a few years of running a nuclear plant, it becomes aged and dilapidated. It wants to fix it up. It wants to make it look pretty again. Nuclear fleet is another word for number of nuclear power stations. As mentioned earlier, the technology division is tightly integrated with the engineering side to automate the power division. And power generation is in the business of managing large power plants and selling the power on an open market bidding system. Now, open market bidding system, you don't have to know what that is. It means that the price is set by the market and people are bidding to see how much they'll pay for it. Now, it's clear that Ontario Distribution and Ontario Power IT are basically in the same rough industry electricity movement, but they're on opposite ends of the sort of value chain of electricity. So they are roughly similar. Ontario Transit is a completely different business. The IT skills needed to run a transit business refer to the scheduling of trains, cargo, buses, maintenance of those assets, and obviously the onboard management of consumer technology. For example, allowing consumers to access the internet on a train. Remember, this is 2001. This technology is still very young and expensive. The other thing is Ontario Transit is not regarded as a world leader in its field. It's actually regarded as somewhat of a laggard. And the thought of spinning off its IT skills into a separate company which can compete on the open market, I think is somewhat debatable. And you can imagine that the IT guys from Ontario Distribution, the tech guys from Ontario Power are kind of thinking that their elitism is going to be somewhat damaged by merging with the kind of pathetic tech guys from Ontario Transit. The story gets more interesting because what I've put in here is some of the very rough ratios and numbers related to all of these companies, right? So you have Ontario IT. Well, let's just go through this in terms of priority, right? You've got Ontario Distribution, which has the most number of employees. It's the biggest, not by much, but meaningful amounts. Even though it's got the most number of employees, it's kind of in the midway between support staff, but it's got roughly the same amount of management. You've got Ontario Power, which you can see is quite efficient when it comes to deploying support staff, doesn't have a lot. And then you've got Ontario Transit IT, which is, we can see why it's a laggard. It's got these employees, which is, amongst the lowest amounts, but it's got an incredible amount of support staff. In terms of finances, you've got Ontario Power IT, which is the largest by revenue. And then you've got Ontario Transit IT, which has a lot of support staff with the smallest amount of revenue, right? And you can see revenue per labor, Ontario Transit is the smallest, Ontario Power is the biggest, right? Employee to management ratios, you can see they're not that different, but when you scale this, it makes a difference that you see that these guys have much more employees per management, which means they are quite efficient. In terms of coverage, remember that Ontario Power IT has to cover every single part of Ontario that has population connected to the grid, and that's 95% of the population. Not connected to the grid, that needs power. So that's 95% of the population, because there are some sites like mining sites and so on that have their own power generation plants. Ontario Distribution actually has to cover everyone connected to the grid. Even where there's a city or a location has its own power plant, Ontario Distribution would manage the distribution. Ontario Transit covers 80% of the population because there are some parts of Ontario that does not maintain a bus service, a transit line, and a sort of GO train and so on, right? Big differences, as you can see, right? And part of the study is to determine if these differences can be reconciled. Now, as we go through the more detailed analysis, you will see much more specific numbers in terms of how we're going to do the analysis. I've presented some of the high-level numbers, but this study goes into numbers in depth. So don't be scared when I say that. You'll find the number crunching to be very simple because I'll show you step by step how to do it. And in fact, you'll actually end up enjoying it. But this gives you a feel of how different these companies are. So now that we know the background, how what is the big picture view of how the study is being structured? Well, the big picture view is quite simple. In this phase 1, we are releasing 233 videos. That's right, 233 videos and 233 PowerPoint slides. Phase 1 is asking the question, should we go ahead and merge these companies because it would create a viable new business? That's all we're answering in phase 1. So it's a very highly intensive, very, very high impact intervention. And you must understand that in most corporate strategy cases, there's usually a big decision that needs to be answered. You don't have the luxury of 8 to 12 weeks. I must be honest, when I was a partner and even when I was an associate and manager, and I had 8 to 12 weeks to do a strategy study, I'd say, oh my God, hallelujah, this is wonderful. I've never had so much time in my life. And I've had those kind of projects. But the reality is that most times the board and CEO needs to make a snap decision, and a lot at stake. And they'll call in the consultants to do a very high impact intervention, which sits between 5 to 8 weeks. I've made this a 5-week study to show you how much and how rigorous the analysis can be and how accurate it can be in a 5-week study. So the 233 videos are just for these 5 weeks. We will release phase 2 later, and we'll release phase 3 later. It'll be more videos, more PowerPoint files. So 203 videos breaking down everything you can see that assesses the viability of consolidating the technology businesses of these companies. We'll present recommendations by looking at what is the impact on the shareholders. Can we compete in the different markets? Do we have the capabilities? What is the technical implication of merging 3 vastly different enterprises? Are these people from a state-owned enterprise ready to operate in a commercial market against nimble, aggressive private companies? We'll look at other risks that we have not yet identified later, but as we go through the study, we'll realize are important, things like dealing with the unions. What are the risks, both at an operational and strategic level, of going ahead with this merger? We'll then present a business plan for how to do this, and we will present options and analyze the options for consolidation. Phase 2, once we've given the decision, yes, go ahead and do this. In phase 2, we will actually start designing the business model for the new company. How exciting is that? So in phase 1, we're going to say, hey, let's do this. It makes sense. We can create a lot of value. In phase 2, we're going to say, okay, if it creates value, what is Newco going to look like? What is this going to be its strategy? How is it going to operate itself? What will be the key processes that are going to run across each part of the business? What will be the organizational structure and how will we populate this division? What will be the legal structure? What is going to be the financial strategy? How much cash do we have on hand? How much cash do we need to capitalize the business? How much revenue do we expect? What is going to be our revenue shortfall to fund our expansion across the United States? What does our governance structure look like? Newco's majority shareholder will be the 3 companies, Ontario Power, Ontario Distribution, and Ontario Transit, which are owned by the government. How is it going to work if you're listing a company whose majority shareholder is indirectly the government? Strategic equity partnerships. The government, if you've been to Canada, you know the government is hell-bent on finding ways to integrate the Aboriginal people, which we call First Nations, the former Indians as such, in inverted commas. And they're looking at getting one of the First Nations groups to take an equity partnership in this technology company so that you can introduce the First Nations group to the technology sector. And then finally, develop a detailed communication, implementation, and merger migration plan. That's a 12-week study to do. And once we do that, we're then going to move into the implementation, which will be a 6-month study. And implementation is about how do we take this plan we've developed in phase 2 and set it up so that on whichever day we've set the go live date, let's assume it's 1 December, if we need to turn on the company on 1 December, what do we do to go live and what happens on the day we go live? So all you're going to see now is phase 1, and then in the next few months we'll release phase 2, and then in a few months after that we'll release phase 3. Of course, before we release phase 2, we're going to be releasing another study, which you will see shortly. And before we release phase 3, but after we release phase 2, we'll also be releasing another study. So a lot of interesting things happening in the way we train strategy. So Phase one, let's break down phase one a little bit further, right? So you can see the big picture view here. Phase one is happening over just under 5 weeks, which is basically 20 working days now. When you look at this, it is an incredibly intense 4 weeks. It actually gets me excited looking at this. You know, when I left consulting, the one thing that I missed was the adrenaline rush. I still miss it. So doing these studies is very exciting for me because we go in and we look at real clients, we visit the clients, we analyze their numbers to put this together. And it takes me back to when I was a partner and leading these intense studies. So 20 days, 5 working days per week. You know, try not to blink, you'll miss a lot. It shocks a lot of people when I tell them that all of this work here happens in phase one. We will review the work already done by the bankers, accountants, and attorneys. And not a lot there. When I say review, we're not going to go through all the documents. We're going to take the things that are useful to us. And you'll see not a lot is useful for us beyond the financial number crunching that had been done. We need to reconfirm the Ontario government's objectives. It's very important you start a study. Confirm that you have identified the right objectives by the client. A massive, massive part of consulting studies, strategy especially, is conducting focus interviews with all stakeholders. The federal and state ministers, remember the way Canada is structured, you've got ministers at the federal level, national government, and at the state or provincial level, which is provincial government. That's the level of Ontario. We'll have to conduct interviews with Ontario Power and Ontario Power IT people. Same for each of the other divisions. Focus interviews are very important. I would say that if you work at a company, for a consulting firm, or even if you work at a McKinsey and a BCG where the partner is not driving focus interviews as the essential component of your study, watch how we do focus interviews and why it's so important. We then have to create some assumptions and principles for the way we're going to make the decision. And you'll see that's quite important in strategy because we can't analyze everything. We have to make some assumptions and principles. And if you're asking yourself, what is an assumption and what is a principle and why do they differ? Don't worry. Later on, we go through it in painstaking detail to show you how we distinguish between an assumption and a principle, what becomes an assumption, what becomes a principle, and how we test for them. We obviously have to identify the existing products and assess the core competencies to deliver those products. What are the products each of those companies have? What are the skills required for those products to be successfully sold in the market once this Newco company exists? And does the companies have those competencies, those abilities, those skills to price, to do R&D, and to successfully sell them into the market? We have to analyze the existing business infrastructure for each of these companies. How do they currently do business? Are they successful at the way they do business? Which products, which systems, which divisions, which regions are generating the bulk of the profits? What is their business model? Is it a sustainable business model? What is their current financial status? Are they making money? Where are they losing money? Do they create economic value? Do they destroy economic value? Which products create economic value? Which products destroy economic value? That's week one. I know when I tell people that's week one, and remember, you've only got 4 people on this team. You've got a manager, 3 associates, and you've got a partner. A partner would be probably assigned to this more or less full-time given the stature of the study and the intensity. So this is a typical kind of project I would have led when I was a partner in strategy. I'd go in with my team and we had to answer these kind of questions. Now, this is a very high-level picture, right? Obviously, in here, we've got to do things like we've got to create hypotheses. We've got to create decision trees. We've got to create project charters. There's a lot of administrative stuff that strategy teams do that allow them to accomplish these things. We are going to show you how to do all of those things. So if you are worried to yourself and thinking, oh my God, how do I structure the analysis? Don't worry. We're going to show you how to structure every single analysis done in the study so that if you're thinking to yourself, how do I analyze the competencies of management in the 3 businesses? Is the study just going to tell me I have to do that, or is the study going to show me how to do that? Well, I've got good news for you. The study is going to show you how to do that. It's also going to show you, you'll see this at times, and I'm going to show you later, we have this map which breaks down time into 24-hour increments and shows you what people are doing in those 24 hours. Week 2 and 3, we've got to conduct a market assessment, the internal market and the external market, to see what is the size, growth. Are we targeting the right markets? Do we have the abilities to take on competitors? What are the barriers to entries? Now, obviously, if 3 companies are selling different products, we have to decide which products we're going to keep and which are going to go, which means we have to equalize the product and service offerings, and we'll show you how to do that. We're going to perform a gap analysis in the capabilities, capacity, and competencies of management and the companies. We have to identify every single risk at an operational and strategic level and discuss the implications. Once we do all of that, as we get into the 4th and final week, we have to construct a very simple economic model. Again, most strategy projects do not have complex economic models. That is a myth. Whenever I see anyone, even people right now at McKinsey and BCG and Deloitte and so on, going in and building these complex models for strategy studies, I think they're wasting their time. Strategy studies by their nature have top-down models that are not complex. They're just meant to test some scenarios, allow us to identify the levers and drivers of business value. For example, if we're chasing EBIT for the new economic entity, what are the drivers of EBIT and what are the levers to manipulate those drivers? What are the synergies between these businesses? Where do we create value? Where are the gaps that we have to spend money to fill? Where are the overlaps that will reach redundancies? We have to then forecast the profitability for these businesses, and finally, using all of that, we have to give a recommendation by putting together a business plan and present a high-level migration plan so that the client feels confident that they can go ahead and start doing the high-level planning. Now, we're going to be answering some very crucial questions here. The study is divided into 2 significant updates. And you can almost think of the updates being, there'll be one massive update here after week 1. There'll be one massive update here after week 2 and 3. So 2 big updates, right? After week 1, we're going to answer the following questions. What are the assumptions and guiding principles? What is the business definition? What do these businesses do? What is the capacity and competency to do what they do? Is there demand for what these guys are trying to sell into the market? Do we understand the profitability of each business? What are the drivers and levers? And what are the key differences between each of the businesses? In update 2, this is almost a, some firms use the term as-is analysis. This is almost an as-is analysis. And we'll also teach you how we generated these questions. So don't think that these questions, we just sucked it out of the air. We'll show you how we generate these questions, right? Update 2, what are the implications and risks? Is there a global market? How do we compete in it? If we made certain assumptions about how we're going to compete, what would the business look like profit-wise in the next few years? What is the value of the new entity? That's obviously important if you're merging a company, right? It's all about value. What is the capacity and capability required for the new entity to succeed? There's going to be organizational and management differences. How are we going to handle that? What are the next steps in terms of planning to put together this entity? There's going to be differences in technical, system, and operational infrastructure between 3 entities. How do we manage that? Can they be managed? Who are our key competitors, and how are we going to take them on? Update 2 will answer that. So it's a very, very focused planned intervention. Now, I always believe that when you're presenting strategy, imagery matters. Imagery counts extensively. Now, I always tell people that when in strategy consulting, you're always analyzing options. Always remember that you're always analyzing options. There's always more than one way for the client to achieve their objective. The options become one of the most viewed slides in a study. The study starts with the options you're going to analyze. The client always comes back to it. At the end, you always go back to it. So make sure when you present your options for analysis, you do it in a very elegant way. So this is something we put together for this study, right? There are 3 options defined by the degree of integration between the companies and the degree of commercialization. So you can have a very high degree of commercialization or low degree. You have a very high degree of integration or a very low degree. So option 1 is obviously low degree of integration, but you are commercializing these companies and you merge them after they're commercialized. So that's option 3. you commercialize them first and then you integrate them. Option 1 is that you immediately form Newco. This is option 1 here. So you immediately form Newco and then you commercialize it. And option 2 is you commercialize and integrate simultaneously. All of these are viable options. When you're putting together a company, you have to decide, am I going to integrate them and then release them into the market? Am I going to release them into the market and then integrate them? Or am I going to do them all simultaneously? And the client wants to know which option is best. Now, it is very important that you have a very elegant way to present the options for analysis. Otherwise, the client fails to understand what you are doing and it becomes a bit of a mess. Later on in the study, you'll notice the client introduces a fourth option as well. Don't worry about that. I'm not telling you what that option is now because I want to show you how we deal with changes to the scope when the client introduces it, okay? Now, people looking at this and they hear the word IT strategy and you probably think to yourself, oh my God, I shouldn't look at this. This is an IT strategy. This is not corporate strategy. Well, I have news for you. This is not IT strategy. In IT strategy, you can only do, let me just give you some definitions of IT strategy and corporate strategy. Corporate strategy sets the overall direction of the company. Even technology companies need a corporate strategy. So Microsoft needs a corporate strategy. SAP needs a corporate strategy. I'm thinking of other technology companies that don't come to mind, but let's say that Accenture will need a corporate strategy, right? In a corporate strategy case, you need general problem-solving skills and some technology knowledge is useful, but we're not bringing in people who understand IT. In fact, you'll realize when you go through the actual detail slides how little IT analysis is actually done in this study, which is surprising because we cover a lot and we come up with some pretty insightful analysis which we can corroborate, but not a lot of focus on IT. Corporate strategy is a functional skill. Every company in every sector needs a corporate strategy. Now, if that's what's corporate strategy, what's IT strategy? IT strategy, this is important, can only ever be done after the corporate strategy is developed. This is a very important distinction. If a company's IT department exists solely to support the corporate strategy, you can only do the IT strategy once the corporate strategy is done. The mere fact that this company does not have a corporate strategy means we cannot be doing the IT strategy. That is why it's not an IT strategy case. How will you build an IT strategy for a company if you don't know what its corporate strategy is? So if you're building the IT strategy for Newco, what is IT meant to be doing if the corporate company doesn't know what it's doing? So by default, IT strategies can only proceed. They only happen after the corporate strategy is done. That is why this is not an IT strategy, and you'll see that we don't spend a lot of time on IT issues. In IT strategy, yes, you need general problem-solving skills, and a deep knowledge of IT is required. Like corporate strategy, IT strategy is a functional skill. Every company in the world, across every sector, has an IT department, needs an IT strategy. So this is not an IT strategy. If you're thinking about this, hey, you know what, I'm going to learn how to do IT strategy. No, you're not going to do that. You're going to learn how to do corporate strategy, although we're doing corporate strategy for a technology company. Now, if you're thinking to yourself, how much finance skills, I would say that surprisingly very little finance and modeling skills are required in management consulting. I know people always say that, but they say, but well, consultants are so good at number crunching. Yes, we are. But the amount of actual modeling is quite small. I would say that anyone without a non-business, non-financial background, arts major, can complete the study by following the guidelines we lay out here, because we're going to do a step-by-step analysis. And really the challenge lies in extracting meaningful insights from fairly simple analysis. That's where the value lies. People like to do complex analysis and then extract very weak insights. I would say do simple but powerful insights and extract the meaning. The other thing you'll see is finding very compelling ways to present, simple but powerful data. Think of this slide. Most people would have just listed the options as text, right? They would have said, here's the option, here's the option, here's the option. Think about the way we presented this, how much of a visual impact and how engaging it can be when this is presented to a client. Continuing, if you're thinking to yourself what kind of skills you would learn, remember we've written this from the perspective of an associate managing analyst, and from the perspective of a manager managing associates and analysts. Now, an analyst could also use this to think about what the manager needs, what the associate needs, and why they work the way they do, and what kind of analysis. So an analyst could conceivably use this to manage their own work. For managers, the broad level questions, and you can see more detailed questions if you go to the map. You don't have to be a subscriber to see that, is how do I manage studies? How do I manage teams? How do I motivate teams? Yes, we have a lot of material in terms of how do you motivate teams? How do you give feedback? How do you coach poor behavior? How do you coach weak performance? How do you teach teams analysis? If you have a new team of people, of new associates, how do you teach them to do analyses? How do you manage partners? Okay, there's a typo here, but how do you manage partners? How do you manage clients? A lot of detail in terms of how do you coach? How do you communicate? How do you manage teams? How do you set up meetings? What is best practice for meetings? How do you deal with people who challenge you in meetings? For an associate, we basically are answering the same questions as for the manager, but applied to smaller teams. So all of these questions will apply to the associate. In addition, how do I use hypotheses to structure the work? How do I build a story? But trust me, we go through a lot of detail in terms of how do you build the hypotheses? How do the hypotheses lead to the analysis? How do the analysis lead to the storyboard? How do we then conduct the analysis? For each analysis, we'll show you how to conduct it. And then how do you manage upwards? How do you manage the manager? And although we didn't have space to write it down here, how do you work with the partner? For the partner, we've also put in a lot of information useful to the partner, right? We felt that considering all firms consulting partners like myself are strategy partners at the elite firms, we have a unique insight you cannot find anywhere else. So we put that in. How does a partner manage work teams? We actually have information about that. How does a partner work with the teams before a major client update? So we have some material which shows you the day before the major meeting with the CEO, what does the partner do at 8 a.m.? What does he do at 9 a.m.? What does he do at 10 a.m.? How does the partner plan and deliver the presentation? What's his strategy? What comprises the presentation? You'll see that we've taken all the major presentations and broken it down into the different steps. And we show you the slides presented and we explain why those slides are being presented. How does a partner review slides? How does a partner review the slides an associate and manager sends to them? How does a partner assess consultants? How does he assess a consultant is doing a good job or a bad job? And how does a partner structure studies? Now, we couldn't list all the skills here, but a review of the sections of the study on the map will show you how exhaustive this could be. Now, one of the things that I've made a big effort to include in the training is this very interesting map. Before key parts, or let's put it this way, before key days or during key days of the study in week 1, week 2, week 3, I will show you on certain important days a map like this. This is the map for day 1. If you haven't noticed, steps 1, 2, 3 occur on this timeline in a 24-hour period on the first day of the study. So steps 1, 2, and 3, if you go to the map and you look at the 16 steps, steps 1, 2, and 3 are actually occurring over a 24-hour period. And I've broken it down for you. I've showed you that typically from 5 to 6, or from 4 to 6 a.m., you're getting up, you're getting into the airport, and you're flying. You arrive there, you then get into a car, and you are traveling to the client site and you're setting up, right? From time 8 to 9, you build your decision tree. From 9 to 10, you're prioritizing your branches. From 10 to 11, you're building your hypotheses. From 11 to 12, you're probably having a working lunch kind of, well, actually from 11 to 12, you're building your hypotheses. From 12 to 1, you have a working lunch with the client. Thereafter, you build your charter, you build your project logic, you test your hypotheses, you work on your timeline, you do an expectations exchange with your manager, you incorporate feedback from your manager, you probably have dinner, you work on finalizing your hypotheses, you develop a rough storyboard and you plan for the next day. So here, we've made it very clear so that you can visualize the intensity. This is day 1. If you were on my project, that's your day 1. I mean, I expect you to build your decision trees, build your hypotheses, prepare your project logic charter, finalize hypotheses, and have a rough storyboard that you're going to email to me or discuss with me the next morning. Okay, I'm not going to expect you to come in at 6 a.m. the next morning, but probably around 8 a.m. the next morning, I want to be discussing and looking at your rough storyboard. So you can see rest and sleep is white. Admin is this light gray area. Meetings are in yellow. Analysis and work is dark blue. And travel is, I think this is teal. And then inside the circle, sometimes what I've done is structuring the study and developing the work streams. This is step 1 and 2 on the map. Planning the work streams is step 3 on the map. So you can see what a typical day looks like. So there's no confusion in terms of how you're going to manage your time, which I think is a challenge most consultants have. And if you're working at a different consulting firm and you want to replicate the intensity and the timing, you can do it because we provide that information to you. Structuring the single study, the study takes a single morning. And I don't want to get into the detail, but most teams have the luxury of doing it at their office, but most times you have to do it on the client side. And you can see that the majority of the time is spent thinking through the analysis, timeline, and storyboard for the workstream. So this gives you a very, very granular view of what to expect. Now, I just want to talk a little bit about how to view the material on the site. Okay, you can see here that when you're dealing with a different, we built this on a Mac and we're showing it in a different software, you can see it's distorted some of these a little bit, not a big issue, but this is what the map looks like, right? Remember I said steps 1, 2, 3. What I was referring to was steps 1, 2, 3. You can see that they take place over one day. And if you go back here, you can see that step 1 is 0.3 days, step 2 is 0.3 days, step 3 is 0.3 days, which adds up to roughly 1 day. Now, the way it works is that each of these blocks tell you how long it takes. So to build a relationship with the CEO and get him to agree to the work took 30 days. The entire study took 20 days, 4 weeks. And each part, we've numbered it here. So if you want to click on the entire study, you click on that, everything opens up. If you want to just see how did they structure the study, you click on that, it takes you to the sections. And let's show you what that looks like. So let's assume you clicked on the block, structure the study, right? Click, it opens this. What you have here is a step-by-step guide. If you click on that button, it takes you to a video that shows you how to reconfirm the client's real issues, and there's also a supporting PowerPoint document there. If you click on that block, it shows you how to structure the case analysis. Now let's assume that you are not that familiar with how to build decision trees and so on, right? How to develop hypotheses, and you need more information on that. If you click on these additional plus signs, these perforated information blocks open up with additional information. And again, if you click on one of those, it takes you to a video to show you how to use hypotheses. So you can see we've built this in a very structured way. We show you the actual skills you'll deploy on the project, and then we show you the skills you need to have to deploy those skills in the project. So in other words, if you don't understand something here, background material is provided, just click on the block. Now, obviously, it's time consuming to click on every single block. So if you hover over each block, let's assume you hover over that block there. A pop-up opens up which shows you the length of the video, the difficulty level in mastering that concept, the concepts that will be taught in that video, the time. So let's assume there are 3 major concepts we are teaching, so you know what to learn. The time it will take you to master. So how many months of strategy work does it take to master that study? And then we converted that into strategy study. So since each strategy study takes roughly 8 weeks, in 6 months you could complete 3 studies, right? In 6 months you could complete about 3 studies. Yeah, you can complete about 3 studies because each one is 8 studies, 8 weeks, that's 2 months. So we list down the time to master something, and then we'll tell you what will be on the page that you will go to if you click on this block. So here you will get a video you'll get a template and you'll get a checklist. The template and the checklist are usually in PowerPoint, and the video appears as a video, like what you're watching now. It also tells you how many people have commented. So comments will tell you how active the page is, but because the videos are quite detailed and self-explanatory, you don't usually get a lot of comments unless people have questions. So if there's a lot of questions in an area, you can see whether the video has raised enough discussion, right? And then you have the option of watching the video now. Just click on that, or you click on the block, and we will later have the function to start saving stuff so you can view it later. So the map is quite sophisticated in giving you a very detailed and logical step-by-step approach. I mean, you couldn't find this anywhere. Even if you worked at McKinsey and BCG, you could not find this kind of training for strategy consultants. So I suppose the last question is, are you ready to get started? It's going to be the most exciting, the most sophisticated, and the most detailed strategy training ever put together. And remember, the objective is that when you watch this training over a month or 2 months or 3 months or whatever the time is, you can go into any project in the world and lead a strategy analysis. And remember something. If you are sitting there and you're working for a small boutique firm, or you're working for a large company that doesn't have this type of training, you will no longer have to worry about 1 o'clock in the morning or 11 o'clock at night panicking about how to do decision trees or how to break down structures. You can access this anywhere in the world, anytime, on an iPhone, iPad, laptop, and be able to replicate the analysis. So I hope you enjoyed, and I think you will actually find this to be a very exciting study that will take your skills in strategy analysis to a whole new level. And if you're working for a corporate, you're obviously not going to get this kind of training. So good luck with using this, and I think it will have an enormous impact on your career.